Okay, welcome back to the channel, everyone. Another special guest with us today is Sabrina Huang. Thank you, Sabrina, for being here.
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to be here.
So Sabrina was a very prolific PF debater, was the champion of Glenbrooks, the Cal Invitational. Is it California? Is that just like Berkeley or is the
It's
state?
run by Cal. Yeah. Berkeley.
Okay,
Yeah.
Berkeley, right. Long Beach, MinneApple, was quarters at TOC, at semis at a bunch of round robins, top, high speaker awards at lots of these tournaments as well, and has been coaching with Heritage in PF ever since. So, thank you for being here to share all of your vast competitive experience and coaching experience. So, my first question for you is, how would you describe your debate style when you were on the circuit?
Well, I started in policy at first and I did a lot of it. I wasn't very good at it. I was like a sophomore, just, your average 3-3, sometimes 2-4, would yearn to break, never broke. But I guess because of that, like I became like a pretty fast techie debater. When I got to PF, I definitely had to slow down a bit. Because when I came in, when I was first at my top speed, I was like nearing 400 words per minute, which I had definitely had to slow down for a lot of people, especially since speed wasn't very common back then. We liked a lot of theory arguments, I will say, in our junior year, which is 21, 22. Um, but I think we were very fast, technical, to the point. Um, yeah.
Makes sense. Yeah, very technical team. Lots of, I guess, for the time especially, I feel like you were pioneering a lot of these more progressive positions. Um, what
Yeah.
along those lines, I want to ask, like, what are the favorite arguments you've ever read in PF?
Oh my gosh. I read an abolition K at a round robin once. We only really did this once. I mean, I like Ks. I like topical Ks. Not sure about how my partner felt about Ks in general. Just because like, I feel like I had more of a background in Ks, so I was more comfortable reading them and answering them, especially. I really like the abolition K we read because I read it all throughout my sophomore year when I was in policy. Um, I honestly kind of like stupid squirrely arguments. We had this C mines argument. I don't know if you
Mine.
remember,
I remember on
but it
Baltics.
was on the yeah, it was on the Baltic topic. What was it? It was like something about putting steam pines in the ocean would explode like all the ships, and then that would cause oil spills, which kills biodiversity, which leads to extinction. Stuff like that. It's really squirrely,
Yeah,
which you know,
I love those
I
arguments.
I like swirly arguments if you can debate them properly. We didn't always go for it, obviously, because it was not very good, as you can probably tell when I'm just explaining the link chain to you. But I think that one was it was entertaining, if nothing else.
I feel like entertainment is an underrated value in debate. Entertainment's a voter.
Yeah, it
Um,
is. It was certainly fun.
Tell me a bit more about the abolition K. Like, what was the thesis of the argument?
Yeah, we've read it once, and it was on the drug legalization topic. And the link was basically that, like, the PIC or the prison industrial complex is bad. And instead of trying to reform it, we should just abolish it completely. We had a generic link, but I'm pretty sure we also had specific links to like drugs.
Hmm.
Um, it was kind of similar to how like I would debate the or articulate the death penalty link is that, you're not getting rid of the system wholesale, you're just kind of changing it to make it more palatable. But, the flaws of the system still exist. Obviously, the impact, we read a queer impact, that, queer folks especially are harmed under the panopticon because they're surveilled more. And there's this kind of endless cycle of violence. Once they get released, they get back out on the streets, they get surveilled back into prison over and over again. And the alternative, to be honest, it was just kind of word salad. It had the word disepistemology in there, which to this day, like if you ask me on a truth level, I probably am like, I don't really know what that is. But in cross, I could find a way to articulate it in a way that made enough sense to me or enough sense to trip someone up. But in brief, the alternative is just abolition of the prison industrial complex.
That makes sense. And what were the link like what were some common link arguments on that topic?
I guess it was different on the drug top. We really only read it once, so I'm pretty sure there was like a generic link about. just like drug legalization, and how that ties into the broader system. Like obviously it
Right.
seems counterintuitive at first because you're like, oh, if you're legalizing like drugs, then isn't that putting less people in prison? And I'm like, well, no, because the system of prison still exists
Right.
because people are still going to be in there for offenses that they committed before. And you're not getting rid of the system. People like the police are going to over police in another way, you know? Um, but there were other links I read on criminal justice. There was a good death penalty link. There was a mandatory minimum link. Honestly, most links you could probably just find in the master document that I had from camp.
That makes sense. That makes sense. It's an interesting position. I feel like I debated something a
Yeah.
little bit similar in APTA in college. We had a round about if the prison abolition movement should like advocate for prison reform. And so I guess
Hmm.
in parley it's like we're op, but the neg to that would be
Right.
that we read was like it's incompatible with the goals of abolition to reform prisons because that's like antithetical to
Yeah.
reverse abolition, even if you create better conditions. Like, I guess it's a similar philosophy as the link arguments you're describing.
Right. That's what we went for. It's like prison is still prison.
Right.
Like congratulations, like you're not feeding people kibble anymore. Like you're only putting people in solitary for like, 20 instead of 24 hours, or maybe you're turning the lights off more. Like, it's still a screwed up system, which is the
Right.
thesis of the argument, which I thought was really fun to debate.
That makes sense. So this seems like an advantage that you had coming from policy. You already talked a little bit about
Yeah,
maybe a disadvantage of like being a little bit too fast when you first entered PF. Were there any other
for
transitions
sure.
that you had to make to like change
Yeah.
your style or just the logic of your arguments going into PF?
I never debated lay in policy. Like, even when we had parent judges at locals, like, even as novices, I think for most people, it was just still go, go, go. So when I was in front of a parent, it was really tricky to be able to like learn how to read something convincingly, like case. Just reading case was sometimes a challenge because when I spread, I would just kind of shut my brain off. I wouldn't think, like, I wouldn't comprehend the words I was saying because that's how you spread. That's how you get really fast. And it was really hard trying to turn that off. I had to remind myself constantly to slow down, that I was like, pretending I'm a news anchor, pretending like I'm actually giving a speech to people and not just like, a tech judge in the back. That was definitely a difficult transition. Policy crosses are also way, way, way more aggressive and rude than PF crosses. And that was something I worked on my entire career. I don't think my coach was ever really like, I don't think Eli was ever really satisfied with the level of, toned down I was always getting to being like, you to be less rude. Um, which, I probably could have been a little less rude, but I also don't think I was the rudest person on the circuit. And it was just kind of a hard habit to maintain coming from policy because everyone is pretty snippy. Everyone likes to interrupt. Um, so doing that in front of a tech judge, you might get some, or like a flow judge, you might get like a few glares, but I really had to learn how to reel it in for a parent, especially since we went from Nat Quals. We did like a random online tournament and then we were headed straight to Nat. So it was really important that we did a lot of lay practice. Um, so I wouldn't, you know, talk too fast, or I could actually sound convincing. I wouldn't use too much jargon. So that was a pretty big transition for me, was to just learn how to lay debate from scratch. But it was a fun one, and I'm glad for the skills it gave me.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like constructive reading is like an underrated skill in PF.
It is. Yeah,
Constructive.
honestly, just being comprehensive, because I think people sometimes get too robotic, and I'm just like, I don't really care. I'm still writing everything you say down, but in front of a parent, like my mom straight up would tell me, she's like, if somebody sounds robotic, like I am not going to be able to pay attention.
Yeah, that makes
Or
sense.
or people get like too over dramatic, like they overemphasize all these important words, and I'm just like, okay, calm down. Like I get it. People are gonna die.
Yeah, I feel like you need to strike a balance of somewhat
Right,
conversational but somewhat presentational speaking, where like you're sounding like a normal
right.
person.
Yeah, like you don't want to sound like a bot, but you also don't want to sound like you're in an interp event. Oh,
Right.
another thing that was different for me was learning how to weigh in PF, because I guess right now everything is just trending towards extinction regardless. But that wasn't how it was when I first started. which was 2021, like we had extinction impacts, which we only really read in front of like policy judges or like super, super like fraud judges who were like first year out. But we had to weigh things like recession, which like, the infamous Bradford 13, 900 million people will fall into the poverty card. I was like, I have no idea how to weigh this and how this like interacts with extinction. Like extinction's extinction, big whoop. And I think there's way more like weighing, especially like weighing in PF compared to
Yeah.
weighing in policy. Like people don't weigh as much at all. They're just like extinction, and the other team's like, oh, also extinction. And then, it's not much else is discussed in some rounds, especially like the worst rounds that I've been in. So really learning how to break the clash between, you know, extinction versus 900 million into poverty, or like 10,000 people killed by gun violence, which is like something that I had to learn entirely
Yeah.
different, which, never really was an issue for me in policy because those impacts wouldn't really be numerical. They would be like, just structural violence impacts. But when you had a number attached to it, it was still kind of tricky to figure out how to weigh that at first. But I don't know if that really applies anymore now because I think most people just go straight to extinction.
Yeah. I mean, people shit on PF so much, and there's merit to a lot of the criticisms of PF as an event. But I think the one thing that we've got going over policy is that we have a little bit more of a nuanced understanding of argument weighing. And that's just
I
like
think so too.
just a norm. And I think it's a little bit unfortunate that you're right, it seems to be trending away. Like people are losing some of their understanding of these weighing conceptions. I think there's two things that give me a little bit of hope. One is that we're still always going to have parent judges, like that's not going to go away.
Right.
And two is that I still think even in the tech rounds, there is a logic to reeling things back from always being extinction, or at least introducing more
Right.
nuanced weighing mechanisms, even in extinction debates. I think there's room for that that isn't
Hmm.
necessarily always taught in like policy. Okay, the
Yeah,
next,
I agree. There's definitely a lot more link weighing.
for sure, for sure. The next question I have for you is, what do you like? What is the round that you debated in PF that you're most proud of, or your best round?
Oh my gosh. Wait. Like I can think of really funny ones off the top of my head. Um, hmm.
They're also like, I guess an easier way to phrase the
Ooh.
question is like, what is one that you know is in your top 10? But I'm not going to make you choose like number one.
In terms of like just hilarity or just like
Whatever your metric is,
win.
just a good, a
Oh
cool
my gosh.
debate.
This wasn't like technically like I don't really remember much about the round itself, but we were on Zoom and my partner William was giving his final focus. And in the middle of his final focus, which he was absolutely eating up, by the way, some kid on the opposing team unmuted and said, bro, this kid's so fucking bad. And William paused and I paused and he says, wait, did somebody say something? Because I heard something and I was like, oh my God, I know you said like I know you heard it, everyone heard it. And this kid was like, no, 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 we'll concede the round. So like,
What?
I thought we were winning regardless, but that was just interesting. Here's a lesson to everyone to make sure you're actually muted on Zoom because those tournaments still definitely do exist. Um, I think we had a pretty good round against Heritage. It was like Emory. Um, we had Josh Anebo. I think it's Anebo. I'm so sorry, Josh, if you're watching this in the back. And I think he's a really great judge. And he gave us a lot of really good feedback. I think Heritage read like some K of imperialism. It was on the West Asia
Oh,
topic.
I was coaching
Um,
this tournament actually. I was there.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I honestly like don't super remember the nitty-gritty details of what happened. I just thought it was a really fun round to be in. Because I like the nature of those like topical kind of imperialism Ks. I'm trying to think. I usually like most theory rounds that I'm in. Um, I don't know. Once we read round reports after our coach told us not to, and when then we lost, and he was like, "Why did you lose?" And William and I were like, "We read round reports," and he turned bright red. I'm so sorry, Eli. Um, those are a couple memorable rounds. I liked the abolition round a lot too. That one was fun, although I think one of the judges ended up voting on presumption and they gave us really low speaks. So sorry about that for not making your ballot clearer. Yeah,
Last,
a lot
okay,
of good rounds.
the last one I want to ask about, which is related to all of these good rounds, is is there a round that you can remember where you lost the debate, but like it was a very enjoyable round to have? Like, like what is the most enjoyable loss that you've experienced?
I generally, okay, there was this round I had against like TP at Emory that, we lost. Honestly, this is so embarrassing. We never beat them. Like, I don't know why. It was just, they were just our kryptonite for whatever reason. Even like separately, we lost to Elizabeth and Skylar once. We lost to Sophia multiple times with multiple different partners. But I think they were always very fun to debate. Sophia's very like assertive, aggressive, and cross, which is annoying to deal with, but it makes it fun. It makes it enjoyable, because that means I get to engage with that. And they're really nice outside around too. So like I'm never like beat up if I ever lose around against them. They're great debaters. They're very fun to go up against.
Yeah, what do you think made that debate so enjoyable?
Honestly, for me, I really just liked cross with Sophia. Um, she's she's very like assertive in what she wants, which I think is just fun because I think on one hand, like it makes it harder for me to deal with. On another hand, like I feel kind of bad if I'm just kind of like dogging on someone in cross, like if I'm just like yapping forever and they're just like not interrupting me because like I'm like, I look better now, but I also feel bad because I'm like, why aren't you interrupting me? You should let me stop. I'm talking about this for a minute and a half. But she wouldn't let me do that, and I appreciate that.
Nice. Okay, the next few questions I want to ask you are about your advice for any of our viewers who are trying to learn how to get better at debate. I think the most
Okay.
obvious question and the most obvious transition here is you've just spoken a lot about some incredible debates that you had. How did you do it? Like, how did you get good at debate? How did you accomplish this successful transition into PF, for example?
It was a lot of fundamental work. Like, I think younger debaters want to just like go straight, like headfirst into tech debate. They want to learn how to spread. They like they want to read theory and they don't know how to actually read theory. Like they don't know what a CI is, or they don't read drop the debater, or there's the standards are all wonky, or it's just badly formatted. My advice is like you need to be clean with the fundamentals because if you're not clean with the fundamentals and you go on to fast tech you debate, it's going to be messy. I am going to be grumpy and you have a larger risk of losing. I think having a good like the absolute bare bones comes down to a good flow. Like you need to learn how to flow. If your opponent drops something and you don't catch it, and that's like something really important, like that can very easily lead to you going for like the completely wrong, like a completely different strategy that might not necessarily be winning. And also, it's just important to know what people are saying about your case. Like I've seen people drop like multiple turns on their case, just because they're just maybe they're not flowing properly, maybe they just don't know how to respond to it. Like honestly, just try your best. Saying something is better than saying nothing at all. But even then, when that sometimes happens, I don't really see people taking advantage of it. So I'm just like, guys, there's like three dropped turns. Like, you should have responded to them. You should have went for them. Now no one's talking about the three dropped turns, which, I think is a pretty underrated strategy. Like, I think people should go for turns if it's going to be like an easy battle. Like, if the other team drops them and you can extend it and weigh it, then do that. Just don't extend the turn through ink and then move on. That's like my number one pet. Well, not my number one pet peeve. That's one of my biggest pet peeves. Um, and then after, I feel like you get a really good understanding of what it means to debate cleanly, like how different arguments interact with each other on the flow, what is needed in a good rebuttal, how to collapse effectively, and just generally choosing the right strategy to go for in final focus. Then you can start to pick up speed, and then you can start reading maybe squirrelier arguments like C mines that might not be the brightest idea if you are just starting out. It's best to stick to stock arguments and fundamentals when you're beginning. And then after you get a very good concept of how debate works, then you can start to, screw around and read things for pure entertainment.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like the point on flowing, especially, it's very well taken. Like, not only, okay, I don't know if this is a general trend in PF these days, but I've seen some people who apparently just don't really know how to flow and are like really, I think, putting the cart before the horse here, trying to learn like theory and cadence
Yeah,
without actually knowing how to like flow properly. But the second thing I wanted to say is I think it's like even more of a fundamental skill than people realize. Like I think some people talk about flowing like it's a thing that you learn once and then you just know it for the rest of your entire career. That doesn't seem like it's the case to me. Like, I think that one of the best ways that you
Mhm.
can get better, even if you're already at like the top, is literally just having slightly better flowing because so many of these top rounds are decided by people like accidentally dropping something. And most of that I think can be eliminated if you just like have a better flow and you are better able to comprehend all of the arguments the other side is throwing at you so that you don't drop those things, then you avoid.
Absolutely.
Like I feel like honestly
Right.
these days it seems like 90% of high level tech rounds are just like comparing drops. It's comparing mistakes that were made by both teams.
Yeah.
Uh,
Right. And it doesn't have to be like that. Like, obviously, it's easier for me as a judge if it's like one team drops something, the other team just goes full out on it. But it's like, what if both teams drop something? So just like, I guess, obviously, try not to drop stuff. Which really the key with that is just making sure you have everything down, which is just, you know, that's just having an organized flow. Like, okay, call me like a boomer or whatever. I don't like flowing on a computer when I'm debating. Like, I'll do it when I judge. But if I'm debating and I'm like looking through their cards and I'm also flowing, I feel like it's easier for me to write and like look on like the table and then look at their cards, make sure nothing like, iffy is going on. Um, Seeing any mis-highlighting, miscutting, any dubious authors that I can look at. And I feel like going back and forth is just really difficult. I feel like, yeah, having a clean flow, I think, starts on paper. Just to be able to get everything just organized, spaced out is just going to go a long way. Because even if you have everything down, if your flow is messy and you don't understand what's going on, you're still going to end up dropping something.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. I've always been one for sticking to paper flowing, especially when competing. So completely
Right.
agree with you there. The next question I had about advice for viewers is what resources did you use to improve at debate, if any? Like, were there any YouTube channels that you watched, or any like articles that you read, or how did coaches help you along your career?
I liked PF videos when I first started out. Um, but for me, it was really just a lot of practice. Like I was a Zoom policy beast back in the day, just because, well, there was just also nothing else to do over COVID. Which, did I ever break that year in policy? Like, no, but I got a lot of practice. And I think a lot of like younger debaters, like sophomores, are really concerned about getting results, which I'm like, if you break, that's great. There have been a couple sophomore teams who have been really, really excellent from like Glenbrooks to Jasper, now Plano. But that's like the anomaly, right? And those kids they've probably been debating since they were like, in seventh grade, which for debate is like that's like you're like a little infant at that point. So like it really just comes down to practice. It comes down to practice rounds. I was fortunate to go to so many Zoom debate tournaments so I could just get as much practice in as possible. Because even if you know how to do everything in theory, if you don't know how to actually apply that in practice, then you're not really going to get anywhere. Um, so a lot of practice rounds, a lot of drills, especially when I was transitioning to like lay debate. We had our Lexi hired a former CPS debater, Brant Haw, and he sat with us over Zoom. And every time I got too fast on a constructive, he would interrupt me and be like, "Start over." Which stuff like that, just doing drills, doing rounds before the tournament, I think is just the fastest way to improve.
Yeah, 100%. I definitely agree with that. I feel like I think, let's see, I'm trying to remember the advice that I was given. I had a coach who would tell me over and over again, like, you learn the most from losses. Like, what differentiates great debaters from good debaters is just how many times they lost when they were younger, basically. Like,
Yeah.
if you're able to lose as many times as possible early, that's how you learn. And I think I never really internalized this until I became a coach, and then I realized like if you only win rounds, you'll never actually internalize what the difference is between winning and losing. And so you'll never know like
Right.
what actually constitutes winning. If you only ever do that.
Yeah.
You only learn how to do that by losing.
Mm.
And I think you're completely spot on with this. It seems like a lot of debaters are very concerned about losing, especially when they're very young. And like, I think if you take two debaters at the same point, when they're in like their freshman year or earlier if they're debating in middle school. And one of them spends all of their time like researching and trying to prep individually for each tournament. They might have better results in the short term, but if the other debater spends that same time just practicing, just doing drills, just doing extra tournaments in the time that the first debater was spending prepping, I think that second debater might lose twice as much during that year, but they will win way more in like 2 years down the line because they'll have all of those fundamental skills that will give them more potential to improve once they're much older. Like, I don't know, people are spending too much time on these short-term things that don't really translate as much to long-term. Like topic prep, for example, is like
No,
the
I agree. Especially in PF, it's a month long.
yeah,
Like October, November, that's 2 months long. January, you if you're an absolute beast, you can go to like three, maybe four tournaments, which I don't even know if they offer that many tournaments in January. Um, which means your prep is going to be used for like what, 8 days more if you break. And then it's going to be just like kind of not relevant until maybe another topic comes up in the future that talks about IR. Well, it's definitely important to have topic knowledge. Like, don't be like me and then just like walk into and like into like an economy topic without actually knowing what a tariff is, which I do now.
that's
Don't worry. But it's also like, have topic knowledge, but I would say concentrate more on having good fundamentals because that's applicable no matter what topic you're debating.
yeah,
Meanwhile, we only debated Turkey like what, once in 2 years.
yeah, for sure. So, along these lines, you said that one of the best things to do that you were doing a lot to get these fundamentals is a bunch of drills. So, do you have any like favorite drills that you think that people should?
Yeah. For lay debate, like I said, I like to read through a case, and then if I'm going too fast, this is for people who are, I guess, like more tech than lay, is like your partner, somebody just stops you and is like, you're going too fast, start again. You keep going until you can get through the whole thing. That one's really helpful for breaking that habit. One of this is like less of a drill, it's almost more of a prep thing. I find that debaters like to still use a lot of jargon with parents, which I'm like that like random person does not know what uniqueness overwhelms the link is or thumps or link term. Like no person who is not deeply involved in this activity is going to have an inkling as to what that means. So I like to tell people to like make a chart between like, tech jargon that we commonly use and we sometimes fall back on a little too much. Like, how would you explain this to a normal person? And when you have that down, when you're doing lay rounds, I like to interrupt the child whenever they say the words like link turn outweighs on probability. I'm like, no, start again. It's kind of, similar to that. In terms of getting like, I guess just knowledge on my case, what I like to do is I like to read my case. This one focuses less on case read, but I would have my partner interrupt me whenever he had a question,
Hmm.
and we would keep going over and over again. Like he would just interrupt me over and over again until he was like, I guess, satisfied with the chain of questioning, or there was really just like nothing much else to say. And if I ever got stuck on something, we would like think of an answer together. We would write that down. I would like put it in the docs. Yeah. And I honestly just redos, like there's nothing fancy to redos, but those go a long way. Those go a long way. Especially after you lose a round, especially if it's based on strategy. Like if you just went for the wrong thing, just redoing a summary based on what you should have gone for is really helpful. And then having your partner give a final focus based off what you said is it's basic. It's nothing crazy, but it is probably one of the most helpful drills you can do.
Completely agree. And if you don't have rounds readily available to redo someone else's rounds. Like go on PF videos, pick
Right.
the losing side, and just like redo as many of their speeches as you can to make them better.
And I
Especially,
think frontlining too.
yeah,
Like, I think you can just like grab a random rebuttal and then just like try to answer everything analytically. Like, don't even think about evidence. Just like be like, how would you really said this to online? You're probably not going to be like, actually, Bradford 13 says you're probably going to find like, an analytical way around it.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of that, one of my favorite drills when I was still competing was like a hell rebuttal. What I would do is I would like
Yeah.
I just set this up for myself, but I know that like there's other more formal ways to do it. But what I would do is I would like literally take all of the contentions that I had written on one side and then add like as many responses to my own case as possible and like read all of
Mhm.
that probably in like one long 8-minute speech or something. And then try to respond to all of
That
it
one's also
in
good.
4 minutes. So like address
Excuse me.
literally
Yeah, that one's also a fun one.
everything. I feel
Like
like
you have an answer to like almost everything you can think
right.
of, which you're not worried about time. Like there's other skills for word efficiency you can do, but you're really just making sure you know how to defend your case well.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about, this is the most exciting thing maybe, is paradigm issues. So I've got a lot of
Oh
questions,
gosh.
go a little bit rapid fire here, but they kind of build off of each other.
Okay.
So first
Okay.
question, how do you win a debate?
Well, you have to win weighing, which means I have to look at your case first. And if you win case, if you don't have terminal defense on there, then I'll vote for you.
Okay, so you will vote for someone if three conditions are met. A, you win case. B, there is no terminal defense, and C, you win weighing, right? Let's investigate.
Right. Like if you win weighing and you're not winning case and the other team's winning case, I
Right.
will vote for the other team.
Yeah. So I guess it seems like condition A and condition B are maybe the same. Like you're winning case because there's no terminal defense. Is that right? Or
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
Right.
So basically if you win case and you win weighing, then you win.
Right. Or honestly, winning weighing usually puts you ahead, but there's have still been rounds where even if you are losing weighing, if you're winning your case and the other team is losing their case, you
Right,
can still
right.
win.
Okay, so there's two different scenarios where you will vote for someone. Scenario one is when they have offense and the other team doesn't, because you are winning terminal defense
Hmm.
and the other team is not winning terminal defense. So you're winning case, they aren't. Scenario two is both of you are winning case, but you're winning weighing.
Hmm.
Okay, that makes
Right.
sense. So, what are all of the conditions required for you to win a case that are not just the other team does not have terminal defense? Like, let's put terminal defense aside. What is required for you to consider something offense to begin with? Like, if I say contention one is blah 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 blah, you're not going to vote for me even if I extend that, right? So there has to be some
Probably not. Yeah.
So what makes an argument like cross that threshold into being a coherent offense?
Well, honestly, just like have a link chain, have uniqueness, link, and an impact, which I think most people do. Like very rarely will I stumble across a case and I'm just like, that there is like just no impact to this. Like maybe the impact wasn't read in case and like nobody ever bothered to read it. But at that point, I'm like, even if you win case, like if you don't have like an impact that you can actually weigh against, like you're probably losing weighing, which means I also can't vote for you. Very rarely do I see people missing like a whole link, but sometimes I see a lot of people missing internal links where
Right.
I'm just like, it doesn't make logical sense for me to jump from like point A to point C with no point B in the middle. But also at the same time, I'm like, if the other team doesn't point that out, I'm like, I don't know if it's necessarily fair for me to intervene and be like, no internal link, and then give a warrant myself. But that was definitely tricky because I think it's also a case by case basis because I'm like, sometimes I'm like, okay, fine, I can see like you've kind of extrapolated on this, and sometimes I'm just like, you're just asserting two things that just don't really have a connection.
Yeah, it's
In
weird.
which case, that's a little bit more dubious.
That makes sense. I was talking with a BP debater about this, and they said that one way to resolve this is like if the claims that you are making together form like a logically coherent sentence. Like if the
Yeah.
sentence getting from A to Z is complete, then it's coherent. But if it's not, if there's like a missing part of the sentence, then it's eliminated. Like if you jump from A to C without B.
Hmm.
Um, but
Right.
okay, the next question, I guess, is what constitutes a link? Like when is something a link versus insufficient?
Um, I think the way I think about link chains, it's like it's kind of stupid. I don't know. It's like you know the book, what is it? If you give a mouse a cookie.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like, I think this is how I started thinking about link chains. It's like one thing happens, you give him out the cookie, that's the uniqueness. He's going to ask for a glass of milk, that's the link. Everything that follows after is the internal link. You know, we like, oh, he has a milk mustache, he needs a napkin, he needs to powder himself, he draws a picture, whatever. Well, I guess the whole point of the book is it goes back to the beginning and he wants another cookie. But you know, in PF, we don't necessarily do that. We just say like extinction, people die. Which
If
I
you
don't know. I generally don't see problems with links themselves. I see problems with missing internal links.
Mhm.
Because all of a sudden people, like I said, will jump from point A to point D, and I'm like, you know, points B and C are kind of missing. Which I think those are really important things to include in case like an underutilized strategy is just like going up there and saying there's no internal link. Because a lot of the times if you find that something doesn't make logical sense to you, then chances are the internal link is missing and the link chain is not fleshed out.
Right. So we've been talking, I think, mostly about claims. Like the give a mouse a cookie is a good example of this, right? Those seem to all be claims, right? Like if you give a mouse a cookie,
Hmm.
he will have crumbs on his face, or he'll drink milk, and then he will have a milk mustache. Like all
Yeah.
of these are different claims. Is that sufficient to establish a link? Like obviously some people think you need something more than just the claim. You need a warrant, or you also need evidence to prove that this claim is true. What are your thoughts on like when a claim is sufficient?
I think claims need evidence to back them up. Which also calls into question about how good the evidence is. Like usually, you know, evidence ethics and PF are not the best right now, but I'm like, this is sufficient enough. Like if the other team doesn't point it out, I'm just gonna be like, okay, fine, like I'll give it to you. Like unless you've just actually just misconstrued the evidence where like, you know, that's like a whole other separate issue. Obviously warranting is really important, which I feel like for me kind of goes along like with the entire link chain rather than just like, you know, one specific link. Because I think the more internal link internal links you have, usually like if you have too many, there's like a sweet spot, right? If you have too many, like the C mines argument, it's probably not true. But you know, if you have very little, then that means that there's probably gaps in your logic that the other team can exploit.
That makes sense. Oh shoot, I have branching like questions. So I need to keep.
Okay.
The first branch is you've told me, I at least think that you've told me that all offense has a link, right? Like that's a fundamental piece of any offense.
Ideally.
Even theory, right? Like technically, like I guess there's like a link.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's something we can call a link in all offense. And you've also said that all links require evidence. Does this mean that you as a judge would never vote on offense that is not carded?
Ooh, that's tricky.
Like a
Honestly, like I think so. Like, ooh,
really?
I mean like analytical terms, I don't really see them very often. I can see myself voting on an analytical turn, but if it's like a constructive, like that's gotta have cards. I guess for theory it's different because like you can take a screenshot or you can play a recording if somebody's like, you know, clipping. You can be like, look at this card, which I guess is like, you know, it's not like a cut card, but it's like a clear proof of the violation, which I guess is a link in and of itself.
So I suppose
But honestly, analytical turns are underutilized. I would love to see more of them.
yeah, I agree. I guess my question then is why, like offense is offense, right? We both agree about what
Mhm.
constitutes the parts of offense. So my question for you is, why do you have a different threshold for what is required to construct offense and rebuttal compared to constructive?
Well, because I feel like it's in the name, right? Like you're building yourself a case. You're reading evidence that tells you whether or not I should affirm or negate the resolution. And if you kind of get up there with no evidence to back your claims, like I can't really do anything about it. You can't get up here and assert that climate change causes extinction. That is an impact a lot of people read, but if you don't give me evidence that backs that up, or you don't really have a reasoning as to why that happens, Yeah, not something I can vote on in the round. However, with analytical turns in rebuttal or just like analytical responses in general, like just straight up defense, like that isn't necessarily picking apart. Like you're not necessarily just reading cards being like, this is not true. Like you can pick apart at the opponent's logic, right? Like you can read like a no internal link where it directly addresses the internal link card they read, but you can also just be like, this makes no sense. And then you can cross apply something from case or turns case as a, you know, it's you're not rereading your case again. It's kind of based in evidence, but it's kind of cross applying logic. It's building off of logic that was already there in the background.
That makes sense. Shoot, I've got too many questions in my head, but I'm going to contain them. So the next question that I'll ask is, do you think that this is true of every claim made in the round, that every claim requires evidence?
I think, yeah, I think that's a pretty fair assumption to make.
Okay, so I want to make sure we're on the same page. By evidence, do you always mean cards?
Yeah, I really don't like paraphrasing. I'm sorry.
Okay, I was not
Don't
asking
think it's a
about,
bad norm.
I was wondering like if you mean like articles and like websites and authors saying things. Because one interpretation would be like uh other reasons presented in the round could like function as evidence that a claim is true. Like evidence, not like website says this. But that seems to not be your interpretation. So then my question to test this a bit is with some examples. Like I think that there are some claims that I could think of, like the claim that if there is more food in a place where people are starving, then less people will starve. Do you think that requires evidence or a card?
Like I think that's pretty intuitive, but again, if you want to be able to weigh that, I think you need to have evidence. Because while that is a true claim, it's going to be really hard to weigh, right? Because it's like how many more people get like lifted out of famine, for instance? How long does this last for? Like, even if your claim is true, if you don't have good evidence to like support that, you're going to lose the weighing debate in the back half because
Okay.
your like claims are just going to be too cloudy to be able to actually weigh against someone who has, statistics, for
Okay. So
instance.
this is really interesting. So now you're saying the claim can be true technically without the card, but the card contextualizes the truth of the claim in a way that's necessary for the weighing debate.
Right.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. But that means that you would vote for a non-carded link in the case where there's nothing else to vote for. Like if they also win terminal defense, for example. Like there's risk of offense on a non-carded link.
I don't think I've ever been met with that scenario. I feel like I remember. Maybe I just don't, but I guess so. Like if there's really nothing else, I really don't want to presume. So I will try to find ways, like I will go beyond extra measures. Like if there is a non-carded link and there's terminal, like I'm like, okay, I guess I will vote for it, but I definitely wouldn't say that that's how I would usually vote. You know,
Okay.
it's just that there's like not a lot of stuff left in the round, so it's like, I have to either presume or
Yeah, that
give like, lower the bar a little bit.
yeah. Yeah, I'm with you there. I have the same idea about this. So that means if we go all the way back to the start, you said that there's two ways to win. So now you can win one of those two ways without cards. Hypothetically.
It's going to be an uphill battle for you, and like I really wouldn't recommend it.
Right, yeah. This is not like a recommendation, but I'm investigating like the bare minimum of what is technically required for something to work, to like earn your ballot. So then the next part
I
that I
guess.
so then the next part that I should investigate is that second scenario about the weighing. So you've told me
Okay.
that having cards for your links is necessary contextually to the weighing debate. My question is, in like what are the different ways in which cards can contribute to the weighing debate? And like maybe we could think about different weighing metrics, for example, like magnitude, probability, and stuff. And can you walk me through like what are examples of how a card can strengthen your weighing along one of those metrics or another?
Right. I think if we just start on the impact level, which is, I guess, what we all learn at first, it's important to just have numbers in there. Like, it's just very easy to be like, everyone dying is a bigger number than 900 million people dying, for instance. Right. Like, it's easy to contextualize that. That's an easy way for you to do, like, scope weighing. It's just we affect more people, period. Um, and I guess like if you don't really have that contextualization, if you just like people die from climate change, I don't know if you're talking about one person dying from climate change or all of us dying from climate change. So I think it's really important to have good impact cards with statistics to be able to flesh that out. So, even if you don't want to go for impact weighing all the time, like climate change be climate change, you're going to go for link weighing. But, you know, in the event that you have climate change versus nuclear war, like you have all these handy weighing mechanisms as to why climate change as an impact outweighs nuclear war. In terms of link weighing, this can definitely be a little bit more analytical. Like, I don't think it necessarily hinges on like you having a card. Like, it's definitely not as important, but it can still be important, especially if you're making like a perceptual argument. Like, if you have a link card that's talking about like, this is a perceptual thing, then that makes your life easier when you talk about like a perceptual link and how like you have a quicker time frame because this is perceptual. It doesn't even matter if we affirm or negate the just the perception that we are going to do something or we are not going to do something is going to trigger these events.
You're right. Yeah, that makes sense. Two questions here. One of is really quick. I'm interested in the perception arguments. It seems to me that there are zero cases in which a team has a card that explains why perception means it's faster. But this is still an intuitive
Yeah.
claim to make. Like you can still warrant it very easily, but I guess it's an analytical
Mhm.
claim involved in the weighing debate. So why does that not require a card, or does it?
I mean, I think it's stronger if you have a card
Mhm.
for sure. Like I think most teams who end up making those perceptual warrants usually have a card. It is trickier to make one without it. Because the whole idea is just like, you have to be pretty clear with it. It's like regardless of whether or not we take actual action, as long as like a certain actor has the idea that we're not going to do something or we are going to do something triggers these events, which like I don't know, I feel like that's not an unreasonable extrapolation to make so long as you have like other empirics backing them up, like last time the US like did blah blah blah, Japan, even though we didn't actually follow through, Japan like I don't know freaked out or some other country freaked out.
Yeah, I'm 100% on board. I guess the next question that I would ask is how much does this apply to the link weighing debate if I'm linking into your scenario? For example, like you said it's very difficult for me to say my magnitude is higher if I don't have a card for my impact on climate change. And you have like nuke war causes extinction, that's 8 billion people plus future generations. Then obviously it's near impossible for me to do the magnitude weighing if I'm conceding that argument. So my question is it possible then for me to analytically explain why climate change causes more nuclear wars than your link does, and why your link does not guarantee a nuclear war? And so therefore climate change creates a greater chance of nuclear wars than your link does without a card, like scope weighing for.
Right, I think so. Like, yeah, I think so.
Okay,
Like
but
in a way that's like kind of a Lincoln.
yeah,
It's like,
100%. Yeah,
like the
so
whole climate change resource wars argument, I think is pretty popular recently.
yeah, th that makes sense. D- I know, I think you're gonna say like it's stronger with a card again, which I accept, but does this require a card?
Mm, like, no, not necessarily. Like, I think it's good to have evidence in the front half. You're not obviously going to end up using all of it in the back half. But the more evidence you have gives you like, better ground for you to make claims. But at like weighing at a certain point just becomes like, especially link weighing, it just becomes logic is how do these two ideas of like, say, climate change and nuclear war, how do they interact with each other? How do they come at play with each other? Obviously, like if you have a card for that, I'm game. But honestly, a lot of people don't, which is fine. And I still would vote on those Lincolns all the time.
Yeah, I agree with this. So the last thing that I think I need is to prove that upstream of climate change, there's a way to get to climate change that doesn't require cards. This might be the hardest hurdle for me to overcome. But do you think like if I make an analytical argument in constructive or rebuttal with zero cards that says the resolution causes climate change, no cards at all, but I have plenty of warrants. I give a good link chain. For example, let's take the nuclear energy topic as an example. If I say that or even like high-speed rail. Some of these intuitive topics where warming is a very obvious scenario. If I make an argument that's like effectively a new DA in rebuttal, and I say, or a new advantage in rebuttal or something, and I say that if we have more high-speed rail, this means that fewer people will take cars, and that implies that there will be a decrease in the amount of oil that is being used for cars. Oil is something that's not necessary for high-speed rail because it's connected to the electrical grid, and so therefore emissions will decrease. If I win that argument against any of their responses, let's say they mess up massively and they read like zero responses to this, and it's like conceded, even though I don't have any cards for it, like, will you evaluate that as offense?
Hypothetically, yeah, but I feel like the way to get around that is for them to just weigh. It's just to be like, okay, like this kid is saying that like emissions decrease how much. And it's going to be really handy if they have a climate change scenario that they contextualize too and be
Right,
like, you know how many emissions will decrease if we do X or if we don't
right.
do X. However, they don't really have context for that. We don't really know how much emissions are going to decrease, if at all. They have no evidence about like, the popularity of high speed rail, about how many people are going to take it. Like, I think it is a logical argument to make. And if they don't answer it sufficiently and they don't weigh on it sufficiently, I'm like, okay, fine. Like, I guess, like if they really, really bungle that. But I think it still loses weighing. Like if you
Okay,
come up against a team who knows how to weigh against that.
that makes sense. Let's take one last example on this like climate change idea. Let's say that they do this. They say like, let's say they have a deforestation argument or something. And they say
Okay.
that high-speed rail causes deforestation because we have to like remove all of the trees from the new train tracks. And they have a quantified
Right.
argument about how much deforestation that will cause and how much deforestation generally contributes to emissions. So it's and they also say that this is weighing, like that they make the argument in the next speech. They say these bozos don't have any cards, they're not contextualizing any numbers. It's impossible to understand how much of an impact they make on climate change, but we have cards, we say exactly how much deforestation contributes, etc. Can I stand up in the next speech and link in to their internal link logically? Like, for example, I could say, well, you've conceded that there's a steep decline in the oil use around the US, and using oil is a bigger determinant of deforestation than train tracks because train tracks are very small and they only cross through a few trees. Your card proves that there's not many trees that are cut down, but logically, oil dependence creates lots of oil wells all over the planet, which A creates more deforestation and B creates deforestation in more vulnerable areas like the Amazon that your link doesn't touch, which are more important for specific types of trees that are carbon dioxide sinks more than the kinds of trees in North America. That's not carded at all either, but if that is conceded, am I ahead on the weighing?
Like, yeah, I mean, I think that's a Lincoln, but honestly, you'd be obviously cooked if they had evidence that was like, this is just false. Like, if they
Right,
just disproved
right.
your tree analytic, or if they were just like,
I'm fucked. Yeah.
just scope, like, this is a domestic topic, like, we can't affect what Russia's doing. I'm like, that's pretty convincing. But like, I do like the way that that argument is thought out. Like, I think it's a smart argument. It's just like, back it up with evidence, whenever possible.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
But I do like Lincolns a lot, like Lincolns and prereqs. I think they're fun, and I think people can really take the time and like the opportunity to get really creative with what they're saying, and it forces you to see how everything interacts with each other.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I guess the conclusion, like the reason I've done this thought experiment is the conclusion of this is like, it seems like even in front of you, and I would consider you one of the more dogmatic judges when it comes to cards, probably because of your policy background. Not that this is a bad thing, but just like advice for competitors, even in front of the judges who care the most about evidence ethics and cards and having carded stuff for everything. If you like are logical enough, it is technically possible to win in both ways, right? It's technically possible to win without cards if you win terminal defense. And it is technically possible to win without cards if you are able to logically be ahead on the weighing debate and avoid any
Mhm.
weighing clashes that you would lose because of the absence of cards by, for example, linking into their carded scenario and logically explaining why your link into their card is superior and that skirts around any clashes that directly force you to compare against their cards or disprove their cards. So there are ways.
It does, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Technically.
Technically, if you just are smart enough,
Whether or not you can execute it properly is just like that's like a different question.
yeah,
But if you did everything correctly, like I don't see why I wouldn't vote for that. It might
yeah.
take me a while because I'd be like, oh, I don't know, like I would have an internal debate within myself. It's like, should I allow this? Should I not? But if you're logical enough and you're making claims that are like more logic rooted instead of like you need solid evidence to back it up, then I'm like, fine. If it's weighing, like I'm okay with that.
That makes sense. Okay, next question. What is tech debate?
Okay. I think anything that deviates beyond what PF was supposed to be, i.e., like bring the public back in public forum. Like I think there's a scale. Like I think there's lay, flay, flow, and tech. And I think flow is just like it's not like necessarily fast. It's like 800 words per constructive, not permitted. Oh my God, that would be insane. Like an 800 words constructive, still relatively like not necessarily stock arguments, but stuff that goes like a little bit beyond what the usual bread and butter of each topic. Like I think that's like flow debate. Something that I think would be palatable to a 2016 judge. I think that's flow debate. Anything beyond that, like if you're talking really, really fast, probably like above the 900 words per constructive threshold, I would count that as tech debate. Obviously, like I don't think that's near like policy spreading, but for PF, I'm like close enough. Anything like a 2016 flow debater wouldn't understand. That's tech. Theory, okay, is anything prog, I would also say is tech. Some of these squirrelier arguments that are usually, have not great warrants, shorter link chains, more outlandish impacts seem logically inconsistent. I would say that counts as tech debate in a sense, just because you're putting it there not because you think it's a winning strat. You're putting it there so you hope your opponent will get distracted and they will either dump on it because they're like this is the dumbest thing to ever exist, or B they'll forget about it. In which case you're just going to be like, okay, cool, I'll go for it. But like I think everybody in the round knows that certain argument isn't very logically sound.
That makes sense. Do you like my question is how many of these things are necessary components of what makes something tech versus sufficient components? So for example, like could you have tech debate without speed?
Um, I mean, I think like you can to an extent, but I feel like speed plays a large part of it. Like I think having tech without speed puts you a little bit above the flow threshold. Like at that point, it's just like a very good like flow round. If it's messy, it's probably because it's a good round. But I feel like tech is a lot of speed because a lot of these arguments that people are reading case theory rely on speed to get through them just because there's so much literature, there's so many standards you need to get through, and so many like defaults, counterinterps, RVI is bad, just random stuff that you need to say.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you think it's possible to run some of these arguments like a K in front of a lay judge and win?
I think it really depends. It depends on the parent, it depends on the K. I feel like if you have a parent who is, like a sociology professor and you read them and they're okay. Or you read them like, anti-blackness and you approach it in a way that's palatable. Like, I think it's possible that they'll vote for it. I don't think that should be your A strat. Like, I honestly think you should go like lay. That's your safest bet. I don't think it's impossible that you would like win. There is a chance. It's just hard to gauge. In terms of stuff like Heidegger, Bataille, Baudrillard, I'm like, you probably should steer clear of that. Like, even in front of a lot of tech judges, even me, like, I don't think I'm well equipped to evaluate Baudrillard. Um, which is like, chances are the random parent in the back who comes from Iowa who's here to judge next, they're probably not going to understand Baudrillard. I've seen people win on Ks and lay rounds. So it obviously can be done, but me personally, I think I like to be a little bit safer in terms of strategy. Like I don't really want to risk anything, especially if there is a panel and there's one lay and I want to keep the lay and not kick them.
That makes sense. That makes sense. My next question is, what is like, okay, we've talked about offense already. We've talked about what constitutes it. You need to have a link, for example. But I think there is a separate discussion about what constitutes offense in terms of the topic for the pro and the con. Like, what do you consider the role of the pro and the role of the con in public forum debate? And is it different from policy, for example?
Well, it depends on the way the resolution is worded. Like, I think if it's a fiat resolution, the USFG should. I think it's pretty similar to the way policy works, where it's like the AF affirms the resolution, the negates the resolution, like excluding like any critical stuff that might happen. That being said, PF doesn't have plan in the sense the resolution, the topic is the plan that you're debating. But I also just like don't think the neg has the burden to be topical, like I think that's a pretty common norm in policy, right? Like, the neg can read Consult Japan, even if we're talking about criminal justice reform. I have done that. Sorry, and that's my old coach. He told me not to. Um, and like case technically aren't necessarily topical, but like, hey, if you have a link to the current topic in Baudrillard, like I think that's valid, you know. Will I understand it personally? Maybe a little bit less. Will other judges understand it better? Maybe so. In terms of like an on-balance resolution, like I really don't like these because I like working around fiat more just because that's what I'm used to. It's centered less on just like should or should not, but really just like it's almost more just like weighing, just like instead of talking about like a fiated version of the app, it's just like let's just compare and contrast, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, let's talk about I guess, what you call the fiated resolutions first. My question for you, because I think this business about the role of the con is very interesting. My question for you is, what does the con need to prove to win a debate?
But the app is a bad idea. Like you should ideally have offense of your own. But case defense, like I know it sounds like insane, but it goes a long way, especially in a pinch, right? Like I think it's underutilized. I think a lot of people drop it or they don't pay attention to it a lot of the time. But if you drop defense in the entire round, like, that probably means you're not winning your case,
Right.
right? So I think both aspects are important. I
So,
think a lot of people like to dump a bunch of turns and then they don't really do anything about the turns. They don't really go for them. And I like it's probably would have been better if you read defense. Um, in that case, yeah.
so you say the con needs to prove that the app is a bad idea. My question is, what is the difference between that statement and the statement that the con needs to prove that the resolution is a bad idea?
Well, I mean, I guess if the app is defending the resolution, I feel like they're kind of one and the same. No, if the app is defending the resolution, if you prove that the resolution's a bad idea, you probably prove that affirming it is a bad idea.
Okay, what if the app does not defend the resolution?
Well, then that's like just a completely different thing. Like if the app is just a KF talking about something that's just completely not topical, which is fine, then there are multiple neg arguments you can make to that. I think the most common one is TUSFG, where saying like, hey, play by the rules. Like you're kind of being, fun police, but it's an argument. It's good. A lot of people read it. I used to read it, especially in policy, where, it just the app needs to defend the topic, blah, blah,
Right.
blah, fairness. Like won't get too much into that now.
Right.
Alternatively, you can read K's. You know, if there's a femk being read, there's probably a link into cap or anti-blackness, right? Um, in which case, you can, I guess if it's not a resolution, then you still need to prove that whatever the AF is defending is a bad idea. Because even if the KF isn't defending a resolution, they're probably going to be defending a different form of advocacy.
So my question with this is, how does this like interact with the fact that the con can go first? For example, what if the con goes first and reads
Mm.
something that is not related to the topic and it's not a critique of the topic? For example, some FemKs are not even critiques of the topic. They're just like, we're going to hold the debate space hostage, for example, which is similar to a KF in policy. Does the pro side in PF speaking second then take on the same burden of rejoinder?
I don't think so because I also don't think the neg has the burden to be topical. Like, I think this is where it gets tricky with like the whole first and second speaking thing. Like, I have thought about this. I judged around where the neg read a K being like the resolution sucks, and then the app was like, we don't defend the resolution and just read 4 minutes of theory, which I thought was a valid choice. And at that point, I'm like, fair. If you're not reading anything topical, if you're just reading theory, or if you're reading like another K in response to the K, then yeah, I don't think the neg has a link because the app in this case is not defending the resolution. So in that case, be very careful because that team saw what was going on, and the easiest way to not link if you're app second is to just read something else that is not topical entirely.
So I guess I'm talking
In
about,
terms of like, oh, sorry.
sorry, yeah, I think there's a tiny bit of a delay. I guess I'm talking about cases where the con going first is not addressing the resolution. Like they're not saying the resolution is violent. They're saying that there's
Mhm.
something that they're sort of affirming, but on the con, there's some method that they're
Mm.
producing in this debate that isn't related to the topic.
Yeah. I think at that point, like neg, af, those labels kind of just disappear, right? In a sense, it's like a theory almost, where we are just beyond talking about the topic at this point. We're just talking about how debate functions, whether or not paraphrasing is good or bad for the activity, whether or not this debate space is sexist. Well, I mean, like it is, but like, is the neg advocacy a good way of accessing that? And I think at that point, it's because like they're not negating the resolution necessarily. They're talking about the debate space as a whole and norms. I think those labels go away. And because because the neg has no burden to be topical, if they're doing that, like I don't think there's grounds for the app to read something like TUSFG, because I feel like TUSFG is something you read against K apps, right? You're saying that the app has the burden to be topical. But again, because I don't think the neg necessarily has the burden to be topical, I don't think that's like, a winning argument per se. You can still make it, but I think there's other arguments you could make against a FemK, for instance, that holds the space hostage, that don't involve TUSFG. Like you can read anti-blackness, you can read cap, you can, if they're reading Killjoy, for instance, which is around I judge at the TOC, you can give me reasons as to why Killjoy as an advocacy is bad. There are cards for that. You can line by line, reasons why their alt is necessary to like achieve the impacts that they want. Like I don't think TUSFG is necessarily the end all be all, but it's a good argument. It's just I don't think it applies in this case specifically.
So why do you think the con does not have the burden of being topical if they go first?
Well, if the apps in general, like I think if the app's burden is to defend the resolution, to say that it is a good idea and they're giving reasons about it, like I don't think the neg necessarily has to stay within the confines of that, right? Because technically, if the app is criticized like defending nuclear energy, technically, like, there's an argument to be made that like, set call or anti-blackness, like that's not directly related to nuclear energy necessarily, right? Or if they read like I guess in policy, like if they read a counterplan, that's just like consult Japan again. I don't know. I don't know why this one keeps popping up in my head. It was just a really cheesy argument that I like to read and troll that my coach didn't really like. Um, but I think that's a valid argument because if you can find reasons as to why the resolution is a bad idea, like I don't think you necessarily have to stay within the scope of the topic. Which
So
Ks are kind of, in a sense, it depends on the K, non-topical, but they are still valid answers to an affirmative team defending the resolution, if
So
that makes
I
sense.
suppose I have two questions. One, what is the difference between
Okay.
like being topical and finding a reason the resolution is bad? So we can start with that question.
Like, sorry, you cut out. My Wi-Fi is
Sorry.
not great. Could you repeat that?
Yeah, you were drawing a distinction between finding a reason the resolution is bad and being topical. I was wondering what the distinction is between those two.
Like I feel like there are just some neg arguments that aren't. I feel like I see this in policy a little bit more, but there are arguments that don't necessarily relate to the topic. I think this happens in case to like non-topical case. Those are ways to negate the resolution, but I wouldn't say Baudrillard falls under the topic of nuclear energy. Like I feel like when the topic writers were thinking about writing that topic, they were thinking about responses that don't involve Baudrillard, Bataille, Heidegger, stuff like that.
So
Um,
like
which is, I guess that's what I mean.
what does topic mean?
Topic,
Yeah, like is
just
isn't is the
the
topic.
resolution.
Wait, so okay. So then if I can replace the word topic with the resolution, then what you're saying is they don't have to be about the resolution, but they can be about saying why the resolution is bad. So I guess that's why I'm confused.
Well, for me, I feel like the topic is the resolution in a sense, right? Like when the topic is released, it's resolved.
Right.
Um, and because you don't get a plan in PF, the app is just kind of supposed to defend that. Like they don't get to specify what ways they would implement this, or like in policy, it's like resolved, like the USFG should substantially reduce BCS and FMS of arms to in general. Like you can be like, we should reduce them to Saudi Arabia, or we should reduce them to Taiwan, but we don't really have that in PF. So in a sense, because we just don't get plans, excuse me, the topic that is released by the NSCA is the resolution that you are supposed to be defending in the round. That is if you want to have a topical debate as the F. Does that
Right.
make a little bit more sense?
Yeah, I'm completely on board with that. I agree with that. My question is, why do you think that con positions don't have to be topical? If you do think that they are reasons why the resolution is bad. Like, for example, you were talking about Baudrillard earlier. If you can read
Mm-hmm.
Baudrillard in a way that says the resolution is bad, how is that not a topical reading of Baudrillard if topic means resolution?
Like I guess you could, like there are topic like or app specific links that you could read, but if you have a generic link, like I feel like that's definitely less topical. Um, or just like I'm trying to think of like other positions. Like I said, I definitely see this a bit more in policy. Like reading like a Consult Japan counterplan against the app, like which is criminal justice reform, like that has nothing to do with criminal justice, right? But I think it's a legitimate argument. In which case, like I guess we're going to talk about counterplans. I do think if you read a counterplan in front of me, I'll evaluate it. But if the other team is like counterplans are not allowed, I'll also evaluate that. Just quick tangent. Um, but I'm like drawing a blank as to like what disads like I can think of that are just like not topical, but I would still allow. I guess,
We can work with Consult Japan for now.
yeah.
Um, I think it
Okay, sure. Oh my
provides
goodness.
like a good example. So my first question is, if I read a plan in front of you, will you evaluate it? Like in the absence of.
Sure, but if the other team is like, don't evaluate a plan, I'll be like, okay. And then like at that point, it's just like who just breaks the clash on that on whether or not the AF gets a plan or not. Like
Okay.
I think because you already have the resolution, which is a plan, I'm like a little bit more like on that. I give a little bit more leeway to counter plans, um, just because you don't really have like a built-in resolution plan for you necessarily.
I guess my
But
question
it
then,
is technically against the NSDA rules, so I'm like I give more leeway. Like I'm not going to be like I will never not vote for a counter plan. Like if you make the argument that counter plans aren't allowed and they're bad, like I will vote on that if you win. But if you don't win that, I can see myself voting on a counter plan. It's not one of those things where I'm like I always default to no counter plans, yes counter
yeah.
plans.
Yeah, I agree. I guess maybe there's like two different ways of asking this question. One way of asking the question is like,
Mm-hmm.
what will you do as a judge in a debate? Um, and I feel like that one is like the answer is probably just whatever the debaters tell me, right? Like if you tell me evaluate plans,
Yeah.
that makes sense. So then the second question is maybe more interesting, which is like, what do you personally believe about the logic of debate? Like, do you personally believe that public forum like that plans are a legitimate strategy in public forum in the absence of like putting aside if debaters tell you they are or are not in a debate? Like, what do you personally believe about this if you do have a stance?
I think it's trickier to have a plan with like the resolutions because they're more narrow.
Mhm.
Um, because it in a sense it's like the topic is so specific that it's pretty much already a plan at this point and you're just thinking of advantages as offense for the resolution slash plan. um but that being said, like the reason why I'm willing to give leeway on counter plans is because like I if K's and counter plans are in the same bracket of arguments, which is just like counter advocacies, if we're allowing K's with alt, I don't see why we shouldn't have counter plans. Like we're making perms. That's something that was technically not allowed a few years ago. And I'm like, if you can perm a K, you can perm a counter plan, you know?
Then the logical next question to ask is why are Ks with alts legitimate?
To be honest, like again, if you come up to me and you're like, they don't get an alt because there's no counter advocacies in PF, I am also willing to hear that argument.
Yeah.
Um,
But I'm asking like
I
do you believe?
what do I believe? Um, if I want to be like a stickler by the rules, then they're not legitimate. If there's no counter advocacies, Ks with alt aren't allowed. But I'm not going to default by that. I would just like down a lot of people if that was the case. Like Ks are being read regardless of what the handbook says. And at that point, because it's a counter advocacy, if a K with an alt, especially is a counter advocacy, then like I don't see why we shouldn't allow counterclaims back in. They kind of function similarly in a sense.
So this is an interesting argument because I'm I'm conflicted about it. What it seems that you're
Mhm.
saying is like this thing is a norm in public forum. If we allow this thing, then logically we should allow this other thing that's not a norm. And so we should allow this other thing that's not a norm. And I feel like the missing piece there is why should we allow something if it is a norm? Like why does something being a norm give it normative force? Like give it a prescriptive force in our logical understanding. Like presumably there could be some norms that are like awful, right? Or make no sense.
Right.
Some arguments that people read are just like trash. Even though like
Yeah.
they are like widely accepted, maybe the answer is they should not be widely accepted. So there seems to be a leap between description and prescription in this logic. And I'm not entirely opposed to this leap. Like to some extent, it feels wrong to say like I don't know, like it's kind of like how language evolves over time, you know, like it would be wrong to say that the way that we're talking about things is incorrect because it violates grammar from like the 18th century because it no longer applies
Mhm.
because language has evolved. And so in the same way, maybe debate evolves over time, not necessarily based on like prescriptive logic, but based on what people
Right.
actually do and what people actually end up accepting. And so I'm not entirely
And I
opposed.
think that's what's been happening. Because
Yeah,
like even if you just look at paraphrasing, like I don't know if the handbook has been updated since the last time I was like looking at it, but it wasn't like a rule required by the NSDA handbook that you had to have cut cards, right? But if you look around now versus if you looked around, say, like 3, 4 years ago, the amount of paraphrase evidence has declined significantly, even though it's not, you're not breaking any rules by paraphrasing. It's just like, I guess it's just norm setting. It's what people believe to be a good norm for the activity, regardless of whether or not the handbook says it's like necessary or not.
right. That makes sense. Um, this is interesting. I guess we should talk about paraphrasing then. It's a good example, and it's
Oh
also
my
a
goodness.
good topic.
Okay.
Do you think paraphrasing is like a hard rule? Like no, like do you think at this point it has taken on enough of a norm in PF with enough good reasons that it's just like a rule?
I think so for me, it's like one of the only positions where I'm like, I can't see myself voting for paraphrasing good.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess another question is, let's push the logical bounds of this a little bit. Let's say, are you judging a Nats,
Okay.
or any like
No, I have to take physics over the summer, so sadly I will not.
rip? Good luck. So let's pretend that you're judging at like a local circuit tournament, and all of the teams are novices. That you're. I'm sorry that I've put you in this predicament, but let's pretend that you're judging only novices
It's
at the.
okay, it happens.
There's one novice team that has been coached to read paraphrase theory every round. Every other team at the tournament is paraphrasing evidence because they don't know that this is a thing. This is like maybe their third, fourth tournament. They're on a league where everyone, well, 100% of the debaters paraphrase evidence. This one other team is like has come into that league recently. And their
Mhm.
strategy is to use paraphrase theory every round. You are in like round two. They just won round one on paraphrase theory. They're doing the same thing again. Other team doesn't know what's happening. Do you vote for this theory shell?
I do because it's on the flow. I don't deviate from that exception. I also don't like if they're losing a theory shell, whether it's paraphrasing or debaters must not wear shoes or stuffed animal theory or whatever. Ben Hodges was hit with that one time. Like if you're losing it, you lose. But I would be very, very, very mad at the team who brought it up. I'm like, look, like you don't need paraphrasing to win this round. Clearly, these people have no idea what's going on. Like this is just like not a nice thing to do. It's a dick move, frankly. Like I wouldn't say that to a student, given I'm an adult and these are probably like 14-year-olds. But you probably don't need to win the round with it. In this case, it's just like it just doesn't reflect very well on your character.
Yeah,
Like I would give them low speaks. It would definitely be a low point win. Like I have thought about this.
that makes sense. I feel like that's a reasonable response. Let's push it a step further. What if the other team is like they're fucking geniuses. They've never debated theory in their life, but they're like super smart and they actually end up giving a lot of good responses to the shell. It's like if such a beast exists, if good responses exist, they give all of them. And the other team did not expect to be challenged on the shell at all. And so the other team defaults to just, Sabrina, this is in your paradigm. You have to do this. It's a rule. Even if they're ahead on the shell, who cares? What do you do?
I think this is one of those few positions where people are going to be like, that's unfair. But I think it is a good norm and we should deal with that. But I also think it would also be a low point win where I'm like, look, like my RFD would be like, yeah, I think paraphrasing is bad. Like, I think highlighting large chunks of text and misconstrue it into something is bad. And I think doing that with all your evidence makes it just like impossible for me or the opponents to be able to check back on what you're actually saying. However, that being said, that doesn't give you a cop out, right? Like, if it was paraphrasing, congratulations, you have my ballot. If we're on a panel, you might not have the other two people's ballots who don't default to paraphrasing bad. If this was not paraphrasing theory, if this was something else that's like, again, debaters must not wear shoes. What are you gonna do? Like you're gonna lose. You can't be like Sabrina. Your paradigm says I have nothing that says about whether or not debaters should or should not wear shoes, right? Like if you don't wear shoes, I'll be like your dogs stink, but I'm not gonna like auto drop you per se. Um, but in that case, I'm like, this shows that you don't actually understand theory, right? You're only reading it to get a win because you think it can like get a win in front of me. But like that's just not going to be strategic for you overall because understanding theory is not just knowing how to read theory against someone who commits a violation. People are going to read theory on you. No matter how good you think your norms are, somebody is going to find something that you are not doing and they're going to read a theory argument against you. And when that day comes, when you don't know how a theory debate is supposed to work, you can no longer fall back on, hey, judge, your paradigm says so it's like, sure, low point win, but it's like, do you really understand this argument? Probably not. So I'm like, before you actually run this argument on other people, you seriously need to understand how theory, paraphrase theory, disclosure, any theory you want to run, just the structure and how it interacts with other layers of debate, how that actually works before you should consider, running theory in general.
Yeah, 100%. That makes sense. So would you say that your stance on paraphrase theory is not dependent on norms? Like for example, if next year for some reason someone
Oh
the
gosh.
the paraphrasing messiah comes in and convinces everyone to start paraphrasing again, and like the entire norm shifts, and so at national circuit tournaments, like 99% of teams are paraphrasing. Would you keep the exact same stance as is currently in your paradigm?
I think so. Like I don't know, we're kind of back to 2020, 2021 at that point. And I know a lot of or people who are pretty still like, hard, just paraphrasing is bad. Which, I think that's a fine thing to do.
That makes sense. So your prescriptions on theory are more based on your personal beliefs on the quality of the norm than the like how normy it is. Like how many people are actually
I
following
guess
it.
it's really just paraphrase and disclosure, which are the two things where I'm like, I will probably like I will unequivocally
Right.
vote for paraphrasing is bad and disclosure is good. Round reports, I'm like, you know, either way. You can say they're bad, you can say they're good.
Yeah.
Um,
Just
Personally, I don't see a huge difference whether or not we have round reports or not. But if you are in here guns blazing, saying like ride or die, round reports are like going to make debate, public forum debate, like the next best thing to slice bread. I'm like, okay, like fine, if the other team doesn't respond to that. I guess I will vote for it. That being said, if the other team is like, this is stupid, are you kidding me? There's like no value to this, and you don't respond to that, I'm like, okay, fine, you're not going to win on round reports theory. But I think disclosure and paraphrasing, like those are the only two things that I will just unequivocally vote for, no matter the direction of the activity.
That makes sense. There's two questions I have about disclosure, and then I want to ask you about some other stuff.
Okay.
Question one is this one seems much more strange if we separate it from the norm. Like, for example, if we have an alternate reality where there is no wiki, and I have just created the wiki, like 10 minutes before the round, and I go into the round and I say, I've created this wiki, you have to disclose on it. I read theory. Or let's say it's like a week,
Like the wiki as a concept, or just like your wiki page?
like the wiki as a website that exists.
Okay.
Like if I'm the first person to ever disclose in the wiki and zero other people have disclosed, then this is not like a norm, right? Like this is testing the norminess, like how required it is for people to be following this for that to create a prescription. Like if only one person is disclosing and they go on a crusade to try to get other people to disclose with theory, would you vote for them?
Like, yeah, sure. I feel like that's almost what happened. Like, I mean, obviously it wasn't to the extent where you're talking about it's like one person, like Elliot Beamer, I don't know, made the wiki out of thin air and he was like, God, I can't believe you guys didn't disclose 10 minutes before the round. Like that never happened. Like it was created, people knew about it, people started, which might have been a small group of people at first, but then everybody began to disclose. The wiki began in policy, spread to LD and FDF,
Right.
which people knew about it. People started disclosing, I think a little bit before I started in TF, which I guess to your question, I don't know. It's a little bit strange because it's like if I didn't have any knowledge about a wiki, period, like if it was just non-existent in my head, I don't know what I would do.
Okay.
It's an interesting argument to be made for sure.
I
But
have
in this world where people know about the wiki, then like, yeah, I think you should disclose.
I have a stranger question. Um,
Oh my goodness. Okay, let's
so
try.
the wiki exists. People know about it. Maybe it has some flaws. I
Right?
don't really love the way the wiki looks, to be honest. It's like not the best organized. I think there could be some.
They like changed it. It was better before, I think.
So
Maybe I sound like a boomer again. I don't know.
let's pretend for a second. I get like goaded at coding and I go make my own wiki.
Okay.
It's like a better version of the wiki. It's got like better search functions. It's all color coded. It's like way easier to find everything. It's way easier to download everything. The history tabs work much better. It never crashes. And then I read theory that says everyone has to jump to my wiki because it's better. Um, would you be compelled by this theory?
I mean, sure. The question is just like I think anyone should just disclose period on a
Right.
wiki, which the most prevalent one is what is it called? It's like open case list right now
Yeah.
or
Yeah. Yeah.
something, the NSDA wiki, which like I guess if you were just going to make a new wiki overnight, like I honestly don't know what I would do. That's something that's just like I've never ever thought about that before.
It's low-key the strat. I don't know why. Okay, low-key, if you want to get away with not disclosing, just make a better wiki, disclose on there, like make it public, but not.
Why wouldn't you just disclose on the normal wiki then? Like, if you're
I
gonna
don't
go through the
know.
hassle of making a new wiki, I'm like, that's a lot of work. Like, you could
That's
have
true.
been like doing other things with your life.
Yeah, it's mostly a thought experiment. I guess
And I
there's
feel like if you had a new wiki, like it wouldn't just be like you using it. It wouldn't just be like just Mac Hayes, right? Like I feel like there would be traction. There would be hopefully like some kind of public announcement, like the old wiki sucks, everyone move on to mine. And then, eventually you would have an exodus of like a group of people who would move on to yours. So it wouldn't be like something that's completely unheard of, where I'm just like, what is this thing? But you know, it's it is an interesting thought experiment for sure.
okay. I think I'm done with theory questions. The next thing I
Okay.
want to ask you about is maybe just briefly, what are your biggest hot takes about PF debate these days?
I think K debate is like it's really messy and it's not where I want it to be. Like, don't get me wrong, I love running Ks, especially in policy. Love a good 45-second overview. Once I know my first like a minute and a half worth of an overview, and the judge in the back like laughed at her when she said go on to K proper, which those moments are always amusing. But the whole point is like the neg has the block in policy. That's 13 minutes of speech time to talk about a K if you're going for a K. The shortest speech you're ever going to get is 5 minutes, and that's going to be K case. And in that time, you're going to have to cover the framework debate. You're going to have to cover K proper, and you're going to have to cover like terms, I guess, which is kind of part of K proper. And you're also going to have to cover the app case and how that interacts with the K. Now, in PF, the longest speech time we get is 4 minutes. Like, you can technically fit a K in 4 minutes if you speak fast enough. Whether or not you can incorporate all of those elements in the subsequent speeches cleanly without dropping anything important that is like, fundamental to winning on the K, i.e., on framework, or just the K's thesis in general proper, like that's a different question. And I feel like a lot of people kind of, it's very like people are spread too thin. Again, these are a lot of things to cover. We have less than half the time into an ARM policy has to cover a K, which like I don't think it's almost possible necessarily right now in the state of things, the way Ks are formatted and run, to be able to talk about framework, K proper, and the case in 2 minutes. Like you have to I guess be on some like demon timing. Um, you have to speak like beyond policy spreading if you want to fit everything in, which I think Ks as an idea are good, but I think in PF, like they need to be seriously reformed. Um, it's just the way things are, they're just not compatible with the speech times. And there's a lot of things that get dropped, or a lot of things that I wish people can expand on, or a lot of things that people just don't really flesh out in general, because of the limitations that Final Focus especially has.
Okay, this is interesting. I've heard this take quite a bit. My question is, what do you think is the fundamental difference between a K and a disad, for example?
Well, the K also has the alt, which the simplest way to put it is a K is like disad plus counterplan,
Right, right.
right? So you have like the disad part of it, you have the conditionality part of it, like the counter advocacy part of it, but because Ks like don't really operate around fiat necessarily, you also have to do framework. You also have to talk about whether or not the app gets to where the case gets to weigh their case against the K, right? You have to talk about what is the role of the judge, am I an educator or am I a policymaker? What is the best model of debate that we should be propagating? And that is a long discussion that is had in policy. There's a lot of important warrants in there that a lot of the times, like some of the bare basics that had when I was debating, I'm like, some of these, like, I just don't see very often. I don't see a lot of these, like, role of the judge arguments very often where they're like, you're an educator. The only thing that matters in this round, like, obviously, fiat's not real. If I vote AF, I'm not going to stop the world from self destruction. But the only thing that matters, the only tangible impact is our political subjectivity and the way we relate to the world, which means that because of this, you are an educator. You have to determine who has the best model of like ethics, for instance, who has, the better epistemology, which I think is like a good argument to be making. But it's just not being made because there's just not enough time. It's stuff like that that gets cropped out that I'm like, all of these reasonings as to why you should get to weigh the AF against the alt, or why you shouldn't get to weigh the AF against the alt, or if the judge if the judge is a policymaker, or if they're an educator, like all of these reasonings are being furiously abbreviated or just sometimes not even discussed in certain rounds,
Yeah, that,
which I think framework takes up a large chunk of the K debate too. Because if you like, again, if you lose on framework on the K, it's just kind of like, you're kind of cooked, right?
yeah.
Um,
I guess my question,
which I guess a large chunk of it is framework.
why is it necessarily a problem for framework to be abbreviated in PF?
Um, I think the way framework, or is that what people call it these days? I don't know.
Yeah.
How it's like run these days, or like the role of the ballot or the role of the judge. Like, I honestly don't really like the way it's being run. Like, the K team gets up and they're like, the role of the ballot is to vote for the best debater, or like, is to vote for the debater who best like decolonizes. And I'm like, okay, well, congratulations. Like, you read a set call K. Like, I guess, like, it's an argument, but it's like the role of the ballot is to vote for whoever's doing the thing I'm doing, essentially, which I'm
Yeah.
like, okay,
That stuff's so
like, cool.
It's so silly. It's
I know, and it's everywhere, and I'm like, I don't know what to do with this. I'm like, this is a silly argument, and I'm just like, I don't know what to do with
like
it.
really makes no
That's
logic.
how the state of things are, right? Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's honestly like about as deep we can go, just because we don't have that much time to talk about fiat is illusory, the judge is an educator, vote for who has the best epistemology, right? Like we don't have time to get into the nitty-gritty details about weighing the odds against the odds, the role of the judge, the role of the ballot. That's not just like vote for whoever is mentioning the thing I mentioned. Because the speech times are so short. Like there are very fruitful discussions that are being held on framework, like who spills up better? You know,
Right.
is it the app or is it the alt? And it's just like I think those are cool discussions to have, but because of the limitations, if we have that discussion in its entirety, we're probably not going to get to the K page.
Right. That makes sense. I
So there's almost a compromise.
Yeah, there's two things I'm thinking here. I'll start with I think that this is a problem that's not necessarily unique to K's. Like, okay, for example, if I read the econ dissad, there is an entire field of economics that I'm not explaining, right? And if I was in policy debate, or better yet, if I was in an actual academic debate, uh, in an actual forum with economists, then we would be talking about economic issues in like infinitely more depth than anyone has ever talked about them in PF. Even if you spend the entirety of a PF round talking about the economy, you still don't get anywhere close to actually talking about the real concepts of economics. It's all just heuristics because you're limited in time. And that is like
Mhm.
deeply bad for the educational value when we're talking about the economy. At the same time, I think it's totally fine to have an econ DA as your fourth contention in the second constructive. Make it like 45 seconds. I'm totally okay with that. And I don't think that it necessarily damages the value of debate very much. So I'm asking, I guess, like why is it not the same thing for Ks, where we can accept that there is less educational value than there could be in other spaces, but that there still is educational value to them, enough to justify them being read.
Because I think framework is a large part of the K, right? Because an econ DA still operates under the assumption of fiat, right? But the role of the judge is probably just to be a policymaker in that round. But in a K round, that is also up for debate. So talking about that also crowds out a lot of important discussion that can be held on the K. Like ideally, we can discuss these both at once, right? But we can't. And ideally, one of them is going to get sacrificed for the other. And, I think because K proper and framework are so deeply like entwined with each other, it's really hard to get a full fleshed out debate. It's like not even just like on an educational level. Like I think you would learn so much more from a policy K round than a PFK round, but it's also just like as a judge, like warranting is sometimes just missing because people are trying to cover too much because it is a lot to cover. And you can cover an econ DA fine, right? Um, and like it probably won't have like a huge time crunch. Like so long as you're like collapsing and doing everything else right, and you're not bringing in four contentions into the back half, you will probably be fine. But with K's, because you probably just like do have to bring in K, like the K and framework, that's trickier to do because you're not going to have as much time to be able to flush out the case thesis in depth while also explaining to me what my role is.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess one question that I have is like, why is this not partially solved by the fact that the team responding to the K is also time constrained? Like the responses to the K, to the framework, for example, are also much less in quantity, for example, compared to in policy. Like you might have two responses to
Right.
instead of eight.
Because I think they're lacking in warranting too. Like, I guess we talked about this whole role of the ballot thing. Like, again, like if that's one of your two arguments, I'm like, this is a terrible argument. Like, I'll vote for it if it's dropped. Like, I'm not going to be like, this argument is so brain dead, I'm just not going to touch it. But at the same time, the reason why we are forced towards that, the role of the ballot thing I'm doing, like why we are forced to vote for that argument or just to evaluate it in general, is because we don't have time to have you know, deeper, more well-warranted arguments. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Um,
Because obviously in a policy round, like you're not necessarily going to read the same thing every time against decay. you're going to go for different things. One round, like you might, and I think part of it is just like having a lot of responses to framework is good because in one round you might go for weighing the off against the alt, and another round you might go for we're skilling up and creating real world litigation. In another round, you might go for all four top level disads to the alt. Like that gives you a lot of different paths to like I guess winning the framework ballot. But in PF, it's just like roll the ballot. It's vote for me because I said this. Counter roll the ballot is vote for whoever did the better debating. It's just like a very stale debate.
Yeah. I guess my opinion is like some of that can be solved by just debating it better. Like I feel like some of the problem is not necessarily because of time constraints, but because of imagination constraints or skill constraints, perhaps. Like I think it is like pretty much useless to just say like they've conceded our roll of the ballot. Here's the roll of the ballot. It's a statement. They don't link it to the statement. We win the statement. Um, like if there's no warrant for,
Yeah.
and I actually think approximately zero teams have ever warranted their roll of the ballot as an exclusive filter in the round in PF. Um,
Yeah. Honestly, I think that too. Like the framework debates I see are just not
yeah,
well warranted at all. It's
100%.
honestly just the same thing over and over again,
Like it
which
doesn't
is
make,
definitely not how things are in policy because people go for different layers on the framework debate,
yeah, yeah.
which I think is what makes it fun.
I guess my position is I think that's theoretically possible in PF, even with the time constraints, even if you're correct that probably it's like incredibly difficult. Um, I think that the first step at the very least is like there's two solutions, right? One, either don't run Ks, or two, at the very least, do something different, right? Like, don't use this,
Right. I think so too.
yeah, like do better framework debates, even if they have to be abbreviated.
Yeah.
Like the abbreviation,
Like Ks and PF right now just don't work. Like I don't think
yeah,
they're a bad idea. I think Ks are good, but again, just because of the way formatting is, like I'm like this is I don't think we're getting all the education that we could be getting.
yeah, that we can totally agree on. I think that there are better ways to run Ks, and that maybe starts, or at least one big example of that is the maturity of the framework debate.
Yeah, for sure. Because right now I feel like the framework debate is just like it's just in such a state where I'm just like I don't even like I don't know. This is just a claim you're asserting. It doesn't I don't really see a warrant as to why the roll of the ballot is good necessarily, in most rounds.
Or even like why, like even if it is good, like there's just never a justification for why it's exclusive. Like it's always so
I
hyper.
agree.
It's just like, okay, you've given five reasons why this is something I should consider, but none of those five reasons are why this is the only thing I should consider. It's like a very basic
Right.
logical premise that's missing. I don't know.
No, I agree.
Okay. Last thing I want to ask you about is some questions about the value of debate. So I've got like a few back-to-back questions that I want your help.
Okay.
The first question is, what do you think are the
Okay.
benefits of doing debate?
I think PF especially is one of the, I guess, events within the NSDA's list of events that gives you the best portable skills. Obviously, it makes you more efficient at public speaking. Like it just, no matter how anxious you are initially, if you just power through it for the next like 4 years, you are going to come out a better public speaker than you were 4 years ago, right? I think it also gives you the ability to do good research. Hopefully, you're doing good research and you're cutting your cards properly, but it teaches you how to look up stuff that you need. It teaches you how to look up evidence, how to find that, what to search up, how to search. I also just think that being able to pick apart at someone else's argument in a way that doesn't involve like ad hominems or just other logical fallacies is a really useful skill to have. Because, in real life, if you're gonna like debate someone, I don't know, maybe like you have a racist uncle or something, you're not gonna be like, well, you're ugly, so psych, right? You're not resorting to ad hominems or other logical fallacies probably isn't going to change your racist uncle's mind, but picking apart the logical inconsistencies in those arguments, you know, again, a lot of people are stubborn, but there's definitely more of a fighting chance that you have there. I think debating gives you a pretty good chain of logic And it also helps you see why other arguments that people are making might not be as logical. You can find those flaws easier and quicker.
Yeah, 100%. These all seem like great benefits that are all sort of debate is instrumental to them. Are there any like non-instrumental benefits? As in, like, are there any benefits to participation in debate that aren't benefits outside of debate? Like, are there any benefits that are only inherent to when you're doing debate? I don't know if that question makes any sense, but
Well, I can talk really fast, I guess. I'm not sure what you mean.
yeah, I guess I'll rephrase. Like, what I'm getting at is I am of the opinion that there are good reasons to do debate, even if it's not helpful for you later in life, because of something about the experience itself. Um, like, for example, there are reasons to go to school because it helps you get more money later in life. But there are also reasons to go to school because your friends are at school or because it's fun to learn things, and maybe that's like inherently valuable. So I'm wondering if
Right.
there are similar reasons for debate.
I think to a certain extent, like, yes, it is fun to travel, um, go to, Texas, see your friends, do a little college tour while you're at it before the round robin, get some torchies, which we don't have in California. God, I love torchies. Like, I do love the travel aspect of it. I love meeting new people. I love having this like web of connections. Like I have friends in Texas, I have friends in New York, I obviously have friends in California, I have friends in Minnesota. I keep in touch with a lot of people around the country, and I think that is really valuable. Even if I came out of these 4 years and I was just like doo doo at debate, like I still think that's valuable. That being said, I think being a female identifying debater has given me a vastly different social experience from someone who is male identifying. I think largely at its core, debate is still kind of a boys' club, right? If we look at the amount of
Kind of.
female debaters to male debaters, huh?
I was saying kind of. I feel like it,
Yeah, like it is. It largely is still. Even if we just look at the pool of like female debaters to male debaters, that ratio is skewed. When we go into out rounds, it is significantly more skewed. Right. Like when you go into deep Englands, like I think at Glenbrooks, when we reached a certain point, like I want to say octaves or quarters, I'm not clear on which round it was. I was the only girl, right? And it's not because girls suck at debate, right? It's because girls are crowded out of the activity because of sexism from judges and their peers. And while I do think lay judges should stay in the activity because it does give you a lot of those portable skills that I just talked about, I also think that there should be some element of judge training. Like, I don't think a judge should be walking into a round without confronting their own implicit biases. And this doesn't just go for female debaters, it goes for debaters of color too, right? And I think like if we just like look at the stats, it is clear that while a lot of male debaters are having fun and they're forming prep groups and they're getting together, just like having a good time. A lot of female debaters are excluded from that because there's not many that are participating because they have been crowded out.
yeah, 100%. I remember I did some thing with like round recordings online. I remember it was something insane. Like there were like 50 times more round recordings with four men than with four women, which is
Right.
like I feel like it's obvious when you go to tournaments that this you see this all around you. You were talking about judge training. I think this is a great idea and something that's happening a tiny bit, but like not necessarily in the most effective ways. But my question for you is, what do you consider, like, what do you think are the biggest factors that create this boys' club? Do you think it's primarily judges, or even if it is primarily judges, like, what do you think are the other factors, and which one, like, how would you sort of rank those factors?
I don't know how I would rank them because I think the experience is like different for every debater. I know a lot of people who have gotten like rude judge comments on them being too aggressive or like them not presenting a certain way, which like, I haven't had to deal with that as much with myself. Like I feel like the sexism I largely had to experience was in part with the male peers that I had to deal with. And at some point, like I just got tired of it and I just kind of like dropped off the circuit entirely. Almost like I stopped like at tournaments, like I just kind of sat down and did work instead of, hanging out with people because like I think the prep group that we were with at the time, like I didn't feel respected. All right. We won MinneApple. This was over Zoom. Everybody congratulated my partner.
Mhm.
Like nobody except for one female debater congratulated me, which, that's not fair. We are a team. Like we had success together. Before we found each other, we were kind of just mediocre. It was only after we became a duo that we achieved competitive success. And it's stuff like that that wears you down. It's when your ideas are shot down. But when another male debater repeats them, all of a sudden it's a good idea. Or another male coach repeats them, all of a sudden it's like, it's a genius idea. It's this constant, just like, oh, you're so and so's partner, like not being addressed by your name as if you're not really a person almost, that really gets to people. Like, really gets to, I guess, female debaters in particular. And it's so irritating to deal with. I almost quit multiple times during junior year and senior year because of how awful I felt.
Yeah. I'm sorry that you had that experience, and it's the experience of unfortunately like so many women in the activity. My questions for you are about what do you think are the primary reasons for that happening, and what do you think are the primary things that could be done by any members of the community to, I don't know,
Oh
mitigate
my
that?
goodness. Like I wish I wish I could have an answer to this, though I would have been less miserable during high school. I think there's definitely more awareness being spread about it now. Like the debate hotline, like I think it's run by what, like Armand Kabor, and someone else is like an Instagram account that is dedicated to telling the stories of marginalized debaters, and I think that's excellent. I think people need to listen though. These stories matter, but some people just, even though they hear them, they don't take that to heart and they don't see how their actions might affect female and other marginalized debaters around them, how they might be, not intentionally trying to be sexist or racist, but how they come off as such,
Yeah.
right? So I think it's a lot of holding people accountable, but it's also hard because when you look at the people like the camp directors, not like the actual adults necessarily, that's like a whole separate question, but like the first year out, second year outs who are helping to run the camps, like in the same way, like they're not going to hold other boys accountable when they are sexist because they do the same thing. I don't know how to resolve this. I wish I did, but I think a lot of it is just largely ignoring what women have to say.
Yeah.
And with that, you need to speak louder. But then when you speak louder, it's also why are you being so aggressive? So whatever.
Right. Yeah, it's like a impossible double bind.
Yeah,
Actually as well. I feel like probably a lot of this is, I think that debate, like many competitive spaces, but maybe this is also a bit unique to debate. It has this really weird culture where like you are competitively incentivized to be like on the best of terms with everyone else all the time, but not just on the best of terms, like to appear like cloudy to everyone else all the time. And this is true of, I think maybe it's not just a competitive thing. It's also just debate feels like a representation of your identity in a way that I think some other activities don't, because it's so approximate to like people's understanding of their own intelligence, for example, which like matters a lot to people's egos. And I think especially for lots of men in the
hmm
community, this becomes like a thing where you are only validated through your experiences with other people that you think are very good at debate and them validating you. Um, and so
right.
like there's sort of a maybe a social penalty for like doing anything that might hurt your relationship with another person that you think is very good in the activity. Um, and I feel like this is a gendered thing to a very, very high extent, not only because men, like, because of maybe other factors, men are generally more competitively successful on average, and there just are more men. Um, then if there's like a choice between like asking another person that you know, another man that you know, like to correct the way that they're talking about someone versus to stay silent, sometimes the thing to do, like the calculation to make to preserve your reputation the most, is the latter, is to just stay silent and not say anything, even if it does catch your attention, even if you know that this is an issue. I think that perhaps, and this is very intangible, and there's no method necessarily to do this, but perhaps one way to swing this is to change the calculation and create more of a reputational benefit uh, to like actually calling out that behavior and more of a reputational benefit to calling in women in the space and more of a reputational harm to just letting that stuff fly. Um, but I don't know. Like, I don't know how to do that. I think that it's kind of also weird to like try to artificially construct like a social penalty.
Right. Like,
Like,
I don't think it should be about like reputation necessarily. Like,
yeah,
I know people are motivated by that, but I'm like, I don't think they're like, I don't think that is going to be like the sole reason why debate gets better with sexism, right? Like, even in spite of all these papers that have been released by Skylar and Elizabeth, and I think AJ and somebody, was it Renee? I don't remember. I'm so sorry. Um, they like wrote a paper about like sexism and with Instagram posts detailing experiences of female debaters. I watched a cross sex where a guy could not admit that sexism was present in the debate space in a FMK round, which I'm like strategically, I'm like, Doc, it's okay. Like you can say sexism exists. There are other ways to get around this K. But I'm like, the fact that you can't even admit that in spite of seeing all these things and hearing all these things, I'm just like, I don't know how you get to that point. Is this just denial?
yeah,
Or do you just simply not care?
a
And you
hundred
just don't care because it's a system that benefits you. And that's something that, like, I don't know how we're going to get people to change and get people to care. There is awareness about this issue. Like, I am not the first woman to come out and say that debate is a sexist activity. There have been speeches about this done at Nats, which I guess isn't speech, but just the general speech and debate community being sexist. But still, you know, if we still look at the statistics, not much is improving. If you still
yeah,
talk to female debaters, they can definitely give you anecdotes, especially when they're paired with a male partner. A lot of the times they're just referred to as like blank's partner, as if they're just like they're nameless, as if the guy is getting all the success.
right. If they're referred to at all, like, lo-
Right.
it's just the guy. Um,
Like I don't know if this is a result of me just like kind of not being active on the circuit as much, but like even when I was competing, when I was coaching at camp, people would come up to me and be like, "Are you William's partner?" And I'm like, I have a name, right?
yeah,
Like, don't refer to me as that. Like, William is my partner. Like, we are like, it's not one without the other. And I would not be happy if somebody was like, "Oh, are you Sabrina's partner?" To him, I'd be like, "Okay, like dog has a name and a personality. Like, his name's William.
yeah,
But it just happens to me so much, which I'm just like, if you can learn his name, you can learn mine because they're next to each other on the wiki and tab.
yeah. Yeah, 100%. It's like, I mean, it's so basic. I feel like one of the reasons that this is happening is because people psychologically are creating distinctions between this sexism that we all agree is bad and like, ooh, hate sexism, we should remove that. And the actual behavior that
Right,
that like I feel like so many people don't understand how things that appear to them to be very minor and not sexist at all build up
are
to
sexist, right?
create, they constitute that community of sexism. Like the sexism in debate, I think by and large is not majority explicit. It's not majority
Right,
like it that does exist. That's very real. But that's not like that's I think that gets a disproportionate amount of the focus. And it deserves a lot of focus, but I think what deserves more focus and what actually contributes to the systemic stuff down below is the things that appear to people to be incredibly small and that they could just laugh off.
right.
Like your Williams partner. Like that seems to some people to be so minor. Like why would you even care? Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just making the
Right, but if it's like a two guy duo, nobody would ever refer to like one guy as like the other guy's partner, even if one guy has a larger presence on the circuit than the other.
right. And like if even if you're watching this and you're like, no, no, I can think of examples of when I would do that. Like, okay, but think about the difference in how prevalent that is, right? Like, it is a systemic
Right.
issue for women. Even if it happens for men, it's because you can think of some outliers. But for women, you have to think of outliers where it's not the case. Like, it's difficult to think of examples where there's a male-female partnership and like you would refer to the guy as the girl's partner. Like that's I don't know
Right.
like
I can't think of any.
right. Like if you gave me some time, maybe I would be able to think of some. But I've been in the activity for 9 years, and the fact that none immediately jumped to my mind is like that's crazy, right? Like I feel like
Right.
clearly there is a problem and that needs to be acknowledged. But what needs to be acknowledged even more is how things that appear as very minor and like completely fine behaviors are not. Like they are the basis constitutively of this problem in the community. And I think that until we acknowledge that, until people and the people around them acknowledge those behaviors as being part of the problem, not just part of the problem, but like literally a piece of the problem. If the problem is a puzzle, like this is a fundamental piece of that puzzle. This is the building block that creates the community exclusion. I think that is what needs to
Right.
be acknowledged by everyone. And I think hopefully that's a step forward. Uh, maybe the answer is that we should be pessimistic about progress here. I'm not entirely convinced by that. I think that it's possible to have great strides made in inclusion in this space, even though it seems incredibly difficult. But that's
I
certainly,
would hope so. Right.
yeah,
Because I think you are right. Like a lot of the sexism that a lot of the female debaters I know have faced, they're not necessarily just one-off instances of just a guy being like, "You're a woman, you suck," or like some other rendition of that. Obviously, that does happen, and that needs to be talked about. But what is more pervasive is, like you said, these almost like microaggressions. Honestly, some of these like aren't even microaggressions, just like these instances where people don't necessarily register it as sexism, but I'm like, this is sexism because if you're speaking over me when we are all trying to prep together and you're not hearing the suggestions I have to say, like that's probably not because my suggestions are bad, because you would say something. If it was really that outlandish, like if I really just came up with a dumb argument idea, you would say it. But you didn't, you ignored me. So at that point, I'm just like, why do I speak? Right? Like this happened to me even at camp where I brought up an argument idea. Somebody called it dumb. Somebody else, another guy called it smart. And then suddenly it was a smart argument and we were reading it. It's stuff like that where I like it's just so discouraging. And it's what eventually wore me down over time. It's like just the constant just getting ignored as if you're not even there, as if like you're almost an accessory to your partner or like just kind of invisible. Like that's what wears me down.
yeah. I mean, I feel like for some people it's even worse than that, like a burden, like thinking
Yeah.
maybe like this dude would be better off if he just like mav'd every round. Um,
Yeah, I definitely have had that thought. Like I used to cry before debate tournaments because I didn't want to go or during debate tournaments. Like it was incredibly stressful. Like looking back on it, I'm like, you know, if we look at debate through a bubble, like I do enjoy talking about case and theory and substance and squirrely arguments and strat, but when it comes down to how things actually play out, that's not how it is for me at all. And
right,
it's because I'm not a guy.
right. Yeah. And I feel like when guys talk about those things that are what make debate interesting and fun, like they don't talk with girls. Like if you
Yeah.
this is the generalization, obviously, and maybe there outliers or there is a generally improving trend, hopefully. I don't know that that's true. But I feel like by and large, like specifically, even the guys who feel like they're the most like forces for good in the community and promoting equality, promoting feminism, even they, when they're talking about the technical components of debate, like those are never the discussions they initiate with women. It's always like if you initiate a
Right.
discussion with women, it's always like I don't know. It's something else, It's something about their experiences, or it's including them in a different conversation, or it's social, or it's like, how was your day? but it's never like, what are your thoughts about this theory position? You know, it's like not
Right. Like I don't people haven't really asked me, like, come to think of it, like when I was on the circuit, like what I thought about certain arguments,
yeah. And I
you
feel
know.
that's the biggest problem because that's also just like how people learn, you know? Like I feel like half of the
Right.
way that I got better at debate is just talking with people, admittedly mostly guys, about like just different positions. You know, if I'm excited and I come up with a cool position, like I should have students, peers that I can go talk to excitedly about that. That makes the activity fun, valuable, and also makes me more competitively successful. It's a pathway for me to learn more. And I think that there's a
Right.
like systematically women are being excluded from that pathway, which like
For sure.
it completely takes away the value of debate and it completely takes away, not completely, but it removes a very real pathway for improving success and understanding.
It definitely does. Like I think things are slightly better for me as a coach, but there are still those moments, right? They don't totally go away. Which it's just like I feel like it just shows how pervasive this entire issue is. And it's just like, to a certain extent, people might not just might not view my opinions or suggestions as anything like, as seriously as they would if I was a man saying it. And like to everyone who's like, oh, you're being dramatic, like, no, again, like I brought up an argument idea, was declined, and then another guy said it was smart and it was picked back up. Like if that's not an example of sexism, I don't know what is.
Right. Yeah, that seems incredibly clear. What do you think are like specific things that men should do differently? Like for example, I suspect that there is at least part of the audience is like guys who are agreeing with what we're saying so far, and they're like, okay, I want to know what I can do. And I know this is a difficult question. Like, there's not a great answer for what you can't wave a magic wand to solve sexism in debate. But if you could give any
Right.
recommendations, what would they be?
Like now that you are aware of this issue, take that into heart. And if somebody calls you out on your behavior, try not to get defensive. Like accept that what it is, apologize, reflect. Start conversations with women about debate. Don't refer to somebody as like so and so's partner. Like they're like all these little things, while like minor in a bubble, build up and they push women out of the activity. So I think being really cognizant, like really reflecting on the way you would treat another guy versus like how you would treat like a girl, like reflecting on that, I think is the first step and seeing how you can do better.
100%. I also feel like maybe the most important step is talking with women about the things that you would talk with guys about vis-a-vis debate.
Right.
There's another part of it that's like talk with the guys about the things you would talk with the women about. Like when people have discussions,
Yeah.
like I don't know, like I rarely ever have discussions about sexism with men in debate. Like it's always
Right.
in a community where there's women present. But so many of the communities in debate are spaces that are exclusively male. And those spaces almost never talk about sexism. I think that's also something that's important.
Right.
Like if you're on a one-on-one conversation with like your male debate partner and you are also male, like you should be having those discussions about sexism as well. They're not just reserved for when you're talking with women.
Right. Like it shouldn't just be something you bring up when you see a woman. It's like, oh my God, yeah, sexism exists. Like, well, if you actually want to create change, it should be in the back of your mind. Because if you're not having the sexism talk with other like male debaters, then it's just like, what now? Like all of us female debaters know that sexism exists
Yeah,
and we know what we have gone through, but less so the guys. And maybe they do know, or maybe they just haven't taken it to heart. I'm not really sure. I think it just depends on who you talk to.
yeah, 100%. Well, on
It
that
is tricky.
wonderful note, um, I do have to go pretty soon. It's about 1 a.m. for me. I guess for both of us.
Right, me too. Yeah.
But is there any last wisdom you want to leave our audience with about anything that we've talked about or anything we didn't talk about?
Um, Debate wise, stay clean, have good fundamentals under pressure. Just in general, from like person to person, like beyond just what goes on and around, just be a good human. Don't be a dick. Like I don't like there's not a more sophisticated way to put it, but you know, if you wouldn't appreciate this, like, if you were a woman and these things are being said about you, if you wouldn't appreciate that, even if you were very successful or whatever, then don't say them or act that way around other women. Like, just be a good person. Treat everyone with respect. Don't be a dick. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fundamental. Well, thank you so much for your wisdom about all of these cool things that we've talked about. I'm gonna go after this. I'm gonna go look at your wiki page and look at that consult Japan counterplan. I feel like we've talked about it enough
Oh
that
my
I can read
gosh.
it now. But seriously,
It's on the policy page, I
okay,
think,
okay, good to
and
know.
it's a while back. Actually, I don't even remember if I should have disclosed it. It's
I
been
think I
too
saw
long.
it.
It's been like 3 years.
I was stalking your wiki before the interview. I think I saw it. So all good to
Oh, we ran it senior year once, actually. Sorry, poly prep.
get. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, for staying up until 1 to talk about debate with me. I appreciate it,
It
and
was a very fun yap session.
let's go. And I'll see you later. Bye.
Yeah, bye bye. Take care.